Okay, so what I'd like to end this on is some opportunities, which means I don't know what to do with these, or I only have a beginning idea what to do with these. And so this is opportunities for people to make things better. I repeat, I'm a pragmatist. The question is, how do we improve our situation? And I'm suggesting here's a places where you might want to work on improving our understanding, because I think we need it, and opportunities for IP. So the first one I want to mention is the opportunity for understanding signaling in game, which in sequential games, which goes by the name forward induction, meant to contrast with the backward induction we saw in sequential games. It's where players moving early are intending to send signals to allow the second player to expect certain things to happen. And that analysis is lost if all you're doing is working from the back end forward, because you're worried about what happens from here forward. You don't worry about how you got here. Forward induction is supposed to get you to worry more about how you got here. I'll show you what I mean. And I think there's importance in forward induction and opportunity for IP. The second opportunity, which will connect up with some of what I think Jason discusses, how about forecasting problems? Is there some opportunity for doing things with forecasting? I want to talk about how do you score forecasters, and we'll spend a little bit of time on calibration, and in the spirit in which I'm accustomed to. The first thing we're going to do is do some destructive testing of calibration. I'm a philosopher. And then the third thing I want to mention has to do with some of the mathematical consequences of the underdominance principles like weak dominance. And there I'll just be very brief and say there's lots of opportunity to develop mathematical models that try and use weak dominance more than we have been able to use so far. So those are the three things I want to do. So let's do forward induction. First, a bit more game theory. So the methodological conjecture is that forward induction, which is, I think it's fair to say, is a work in progress in traditional game theory, how you model signaling. I think even how little of that is secure, we can see that there are opportunities using IP theory, which I don't think the precise model of probabilities will allow you to appreciate aspects of signaling which have IP content, which don't get identified when you use precise probability. So this is doubly open. The theory of forward induction in games, I think, is still an open. I'm sure anyone here a game theorist? I teach game theory, but I don't see it. I think traditional game theorists would say forward induction is still a work in progress using traditional machinery. And I'm saying, I think on top of that, IP already could be seen as being able to do things in forward induction, which the traditional machinery of precise probabilities would not. So that's the first thing I want to do. So let's go through an example. Yes. Excuse me, what? I'm unsure what you mean by theory of mind, but I think it has to do with modeling how other people, building models of other people's
Yes, exactly.
Yes. But that's what we're doing in games, right? We're trying to model what they're players. Yeah, it has to do with, that's right. No, I think in that sense, you're exactly right. So one way of, so to illustrate the theme, let's consider some simple two-person sequential games without chance nodes, where all the nodes are determined by choices. So we don't have these chance random variables. So it's enough to do that. So at each point in the game tree, either both players are playing simultaneously, or one is making a choice which is then known to the other. So, yes. Oh, yes, thank you. I neglected to do that. So the theory of sequential decision making, which is being criticized, already criticized in traditional game theory, is the theory of subgame perfection, which we ran into in the very first part of the examples I was describing, where the idea is that remember the two-person game where there was dominance in the 2x2, but that dominance was not significant and made the game. Role player plays first, column player sees what role player does, then column player chooses. And we were able to put it, after a lot of fumbling on my part, some numbers, simple numbers, such that if you did the backward induction, you had a unique solution, which that is player 2, you say player 2 is choosing, if player 2 sees player 1 choose A1, then player 2 has this choice and chooses the best, and if player sees player 1 chose A2, that goes to the subgames, and then you roll back from knowing how player 2 chooses in the subgames to player 1 choosing the initial point by saying, I know what the consequences of my act would be by this backward induction. And the question is, how adequate is the analysis if all that's required is that a strategy is acceptable if and only if it yields an acceptable strategy that is a Nash equilibrium in each subgame within a larger game. And this has already been subject to criticism as a motivation for forward induction. So this example, I'm borrowing from the literature as a general motivation in traditional game theory for this idea of forward induction. So there's an old game. It was originally devised in the 50s in, I think, America, and we wouldn't be surprised that a game might be formulated where the conflict was given gender specificity, and it was called the Battle of the Sexes. And just to make it clear that this is a 1950s view of the way life was in America, it has to do with coordination amongst a couple, one is male and one is female. They were supposed to want to go to an evening's entertainment together. If they had 2 places to go. If they wound up in different places, they are a devoted couple. Each doesn't enjoy the evening. It's valueless to go separately. But if they went together, they enjoyed it. But it depended on where they went, which member of the party enjoyed it more. So again, to continue with this sexist model, the women in the pair wanted them to go to the ballet, and the male in the pair wanted to go to wrestling or something. I don't know, something it's an athletic event or something. And so the payments, it was a coordination problem, right? So basically, if they went together, one of the players got 2, the other player got 1. 2 being if it was the preferred place, 1 if it was the unpreferred place. So since they didn't like the second place, if they went to the ballet, the woman got the 2, the male got 1. If it went to the sporting, it was the other way around. And if they went to different places, they both got 0 because of the devotions of public. The evening was really tired. So this was a coordination problem. It's been modified to a more acceptable formulation by, without having a gender specific, still having a coordination problem. In this case, I think BOS and B sometimes refer to going to your Bach concert, or as for Stravinsky concert, very sophisticated conflict in case where the 2 parties like classical Bach or more contemporary Stravinsky. I think it was Rite of Spring or something. Okay, so let me show you the game in its initial form. So concert A is they're going to the Bruch violin concerto with Perlman playing, and concert B in my version, they're going to hear, this is an American singer, Dolly Parton. I don't know if you follow country with Western music. She's an eminent country, and she's going to perform her favorites. The role players' payments are first in each coordinate, column players second. So if they go to hear Bruch, it's the column player's favorite, role player's second favorite. If they go to hear Dolly Parton, then the role player likes the country music more than the classical music, and so it's 2. And everyone understands the payments. And if they go to different concerts, it's 0 for everybody because the evening's ruined. Doesn't matter whether they're listening to what they like or not. If they're alone, they're alone. It's just a review. So they're devoted to each other. Now, a Nash equilibria, for those of you who haven't studied your game theory in a while, Nash equilibria is a pair, in this case, of strategies, such that each is a best response in the sense of maximizing expected utility against what the other one is doing. So it's a pair, such that you have a strategy for row, a strategy for column, and you say, given the column is doing is row maximizing expected utility, given the row is doing is column maximizing expected utility. In this case, there are two pure strategy Nash and one mixed strategy Nash, given that these are cardinal utilities. So if rho is playing A, then the best response for column is A, and if column is playing A, the best response for rho is A. So that's Nash. And then you have the other one down in the right-hand corner. If column is playing B, the best response for rho is B, and if rho is playing B, the best response for column is B. Those are strong on both sides. It's not like there's anything other than the best response. But then there are also, and the values are that way, that's the intention. The value in one Nash is 1, 2. The value in the Nash is 2, 1. How do you resolve this coordination problem? One is the one, the other is the other. There is another Nash. The game is symmetric, so there's a theorem about game theory of these kind of symmetric games. There's always some Nash which is also symmetric in the sense that it gives players equal values. And in this case, it's a mixed strategy. So if rho plays, we can talk about how you get to this, if you wish. If rho plays one mixed strategy, 1/3 A, 2/3 B, that turns out to be an equalizer in the sense that that strategy makes all choices for column equally good. A is as good for column as B, and since A and B are equally good, you can have a mixed strategy as your base solution. And so if rho is playing 1/3 A, 2/3 B, column can play anything as a best response, but in particular can play 2/3 A and 1/3 B. And 2/3 A, 1/3 B makes all of rho's options equally good, so rho can play a mixed strategy. So they're choosing mixed strategies that stabilize the value of anything the other one does. Takes the uncertainty away. That's how you get a Nash with mixed strategies. But that yields the outcome 2/3, 2/3. There's something about this I want to mention, which I think is quite typical. And I wish this message was learned better publicly. So you've got here a symmetric game. And because the game is symmetric, we'd like to find a solution that favors you to play. Fair solution. There is a fair solution, but it costs you something for fairness. Because you'll notice 2/3, 2/3 is inferior for both of them to either of the unfair solutions. I wish that lesson were learned. This is not something that you can avoid. That is, fairness brings with it, if you value fairness, you're going to pay a price for it. It's worth something. In this case, it's worth at least 1/3, plus the worst you would get by playing the unfair solution is at least 1/3 better than your value associated with fair solution. That's the individual thing. So you're valuing fairness in something about fairness. So, this is quite typical. You think you find this in tax problems all the time. Theory of taxation. You try and find a tax strategy that is fair in the sense that it equalizes response given to risks people take, and that the equilibrium in that kind of taxing game will be Pareto theory. Everyone will do worse than some of the unfair taxing. But people want fairness. I don't mind it. Fairness is fine. But just expect that you're going to pay something. Don't be surprised. In this example, what's going on in this example is quick. We want a fair solution to pay something in the sense of everyone's going to get less than they could otherwise, because there's some additional value of fairness that hasn't been reflected in the value. Now, each player, so this is best response, these are base solutions. Each player has something else called a security maximizer. Namely, I can say, can I choose a strategy that minimizes my expected value, no matter what the other one does? That's the kind of security we're looking at. Let's think of elsewhere. I'm trying to find a strategy whose value doesn't depend on the other guys. And there are those. There's one for each player. If player one, rho player plays 2/3 A, 1/3 B, that's the opposite way side. That guarantees at least 2/3. In fact, it will be exactly 2/3 because it values, if you play 2/3 A and 1/3 B, it's worth 2/3 if column plays A, it's worth 2/3 if column plays B, and so it gives you that straight line we've been talking about all the time for any mixed strategy. So that's an equalizer. That's the maximum security. That's maximum security, gamma maximum. If I was going to worry about this game from that point of view and say, I'm unsure what the opponent, this person, I don't trust, I don't know what to think of how she or he will dissolve. I'll just put maximum set of probabilities. You've got a security maximizer here, which has a lower expected, constant expected value, 2/3, and column has it also. Of course, these two are not Nash, they're not best response. If you know the other one is maximizing security, you have something better to do, one of the three strategies. So you've got already this kind of tension moving. But that's all right. If you're just doing Nash, you've given up on security because Nash doesn't deal with security. But we do. So we might try and go a little bit. Does everyone follow what's happening so far? I'm just reviewing. This is all traditional game theory. I'm just pointing out that Nash doesn't deal with security. Security would point you in a different direction. If you're trying to do this from an IP point of view, or you're modeling the column players, an uncertain choice from a role player's point of view, you might want to pay attention to the security, even though if you model the other as security maximizer, your best response would not be your security maximizer. That's what occurs in two-person zero-sum games. That's the famous minimax theorem. The famous minimax theorem for two-person zero-sum games is that you can simultaneously maximize security and form a Nash. That's what von Neumann's minimax theorem says. There's a strategy, a set of strategies, each of which maximize the security, and they play against each other at the best response. Both of them. But that's only two-person zero-sum. Okay? There's no counterpart to the minimax theorem. The two themes pull apart. Security maximization, best response. So Nash theory says to hell with security, we'll just look at minimax. We'll just look at best response. Now, here's the traditional, at least to me, the traditional concern with subgame perfection. Subgame perfection says when you do your backward induction, you want to make sure that you're doing an acceptable solution in each subgame you might play, and then fold those back. Well, let's consider the following sequential game. Column player has a choice between here called the left-hand choice, which yields 1 and 1.5. So for column player, it'll be 1.5. Or to play the coordination game with the values we've already looked at. There are several subgame perfect solutions, one of which is being attacked, is the following. Role player is threatening to play her favorite move, which is BR, because Rho, I keep pointing here. Rho is threatening BR, for which there's a Nash, which is BC. So that's acceptable in the subgame because BC is a Nash. And in that case, if that's where they're going, column player has a strategy that says, well, if I'm playing BC in this, and role player is being BR, this only yields a value 1 to me. I will roll it back by backward induction and say under those conditions, I will play LC and get 1.5. So let me go through this again. Here's a backward induction, which shows that the following is a subgame perfect solution to be criticized. This is a point to be criticized. The following is a backward as a subgame perfect solution. Column role player is saying I'm playing BR, because that's the only choice role player gets. It's a choice between AR and BR. Role player is not involved in the first. And then in this subgame, BR is part of an acceptable strategy BC, because BC is a Nash, and Nash is acceptable. That's acceptable. But if column player knows that's what's happening in the subgame, it's only worth 1 to column player. So column player chooses LC. And so this combination is called a subgame perfect backward induction solution. And it's criticized. Why is it criticized? It's criticized because it says that BR is not a credible move. Even though it's acceptable in the subgame, it's not credible for role player to play BR. Why? Because BR is not reflecting what is the total evidence to role player in the subgame. We're not just playing the subgame, which is what subgame perfection asks us to consider. We're playing the subgame as a result of column player telling us to play the subgame. We could have been out of the subgame. Column player has told us the total evidence available to role player is not just that we're playing the subgame, it's playing the subgame as a result of column player's choice that we're playing the subgame. Where does that enter into understanding what's an acceptable solution? So the forward induction literature, so let me leave this up, read something like this. I'm reading the second slide now, but leaving this up. Rowe's total evidence at the choice point of the concert subgame is not merely that they are playing the concert game, it's that the concert game has been selected for them to play. Recall the difference between conditioning on event, we play the concert game, and conditioning on an epistemic signal. I know we play the concert game because Column showed me that choice that Column played. Back to a theme we were worried about before. If Rowe believes that Column is even mildly rational, Rowe models Column as follows. Having chosen RC, that is, if Column chooses that they play the concert game, Column must have an expectation of at least 1.5 of going that way. Else, if Column player doesn't have an expectation of at least 1.5, then Column player would not have gone that way. Column player can assure 1.5 by security or maximization, whatever you want. This is rock solid 1.5. No uncertainty about that. So in going to RC, Column is signaling to Rowe player that I have an expectation of at least 1.5, otherwise I wouldn't have gone this way. So you know what I'm playing. I'm playing AC. And your threat to play BR is not paying attention to what I'm showing you. So forward induction is the claim that this subgame perfect solution is not an adequate analysis of the extensive form game because of Column's ability to send a signal, which is lost if all you do is condition on the subgame as what you know. It's not just that we're playing the subgame. We're playing the subgame as a result of Column sending us into that. And Column had a choice which gave Column at least 1.5. So Column must have expectations, eyes on more than 1.5. So Column's playing AC. So the only acceptable solution is RC and AR AC. Or this form, AR RC AC. BC. No, AC. And upper left-hand box, we go that way. Question about what is intended. So this is the part that I'm not introducing. This is the approach which is supposed to motivate this concern that subgame perfection is not an adequate analysis of extensive form games because it's not picking up expectations that reflect the full knowledge of players that we got here by people choosing this is your theory of mind. That's why are we? We're not here incidentally or accidentally. We're here by choice. What does that choice tell me? As your player, what does it tell me about Column? And this example, which is good as any I know out of the forward induction literature, says Rowe player had better pay attention that Column player has rejected the option 1.5 for Column. So Column's wanting more than 1.5.
Does the Rowe player first announce that he is going to play AR or?
No, this play is simultaneous. This is simultaneous. There is a sequential aspect. Column plays first between these two, and then they play simultaneously. I meant this to be silent.
Yeah.
There are no chance notes, no weather type events. So the question, how should Rowe player analyze this subgame? And it's not as generous as subgame perfection says, which says any of the Nash are perfectly fine for this subgame. No, it's not reasonable for Rowe player to think that AR and AC are going to be played if, that BR and BC are going to be played. That's not reasonable because if Column was expecting BR, Column would not have played into the game. So the question, how to formalize this? This is open territory. Yes.
I guess I'm just wondering what the underlying character of the solution concept is supposed to be. So are we supposed to be trying to imagine, look, if we have agents who commonly know they all act rationally, what will end up happening?
That's traditional game theory. The question is what model of rationality do you want to impose? Here we were imposing you might do something with the rationalizability and so on. Here we're writing to model players as rational and not these things. The question is what do they know about these kinds of signals? What can you model IP signals? This literature is open. There's not a consensus about how to model signals. I'm just trying to say this seems like a pretty clear case where if we're going to recognize the notion of signal in the theory of form, This is a case where a column is sending a signal, which is not adequately represented by saying any old subgame perfect solution is adequate. Because if this were the only game, I went through with you what the classical, so there are three solutions. There's the two pure Nash and the one mixed strategy Nash. Any of those is perfectly acceptable as a solution to the subgame. But not when the subgame is reached by this decision of column. That's the forward induction. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a complicated pattern where I want to show you something that I think IP can do by using both security and maximization, but you need to use both to get to this. And at least I've been through the forward induction. I don't see how I can do that without IP. And it's an example. So Isaac and Sydney. Isaac is Isaac Levi, my thesis advisor. Sydney is Sydney Morgenbesser, who's the chair of my thesis committee. Sydney is reputed to be one of the fastest wits anyone ever. He's a great philosopher, but he always enveloped his philosophic messages and jokes and great witticisms. So they were good friends. Isaac considered himself in part a student of Sydney, but not officially ever in that role. But I knew them well, admired them as a student would admire teachers. So we have here the concert game on the right. Sydney likes the classical music. Isaac likes country music. That's true to their real characters. And on the left, we've got a different coordination game, similar form, but it's which lecture to hear. A is the Chomsky lecture and B is the Ellsberg lecture. And Sydney, I think, would have preferred Chomsky to Ellsberg. And Isaac, I believe, of course, I heard enough of his bad mouthing of Chomsky, would prefer the Ellsberg lecture to Chomsky, even if Ellsberg wasn't going to do uncertainty. So this is set up. So we have two variations of the same kind of structure. Each subgame has two pure strategy Nash, one mixed strategy Nash, and security levels. The difference in what's going on here is that on the left, in this case, is not something that has yet a well-defined value, because it's another game. It's not like in the previous version, there was something here of certainty. And now I've replaced it with a game. But the game has certain security levels. So in this game, column can secure 12/11s. Row can as well. I made it symmetric. So this is security, not mixed strategy Nash. So this is the way the reasoning goes now. So Sydney says to Isaac, I suppose this is, suppose I choose to the concert game. What will you do? This is all what game here is called cheap talk. There's no commitments yet because the games are not played. Just to reason, to make sure everyone is reasoning through. So Sydney says, Isaac, suppose I go to the concert game. What will you do? So Isaac says, well, choosing the lecture, Sid has an E-admissible option with a security value. Remember, Isaac's position is first you let yourself to the Bayes, then amongst the Bayes you use security. Well, a security maximizer has a Bayes model in this. And so the security maximizer is E-admissible followed by security maximizer. So Isaac says to himself, choosing the lecture gives Sid an E-admissible option with the security of 12/11s. That 12/11s satisfies being an E-admissible strategy. Well, 12/11s, if Sydney in this game has a value of at least 12/11s, then Sydney, who is the column player, must be playing Perlman, because if he plays Dolly, then he's only getting one, which is less than 12/11s. So Isaac says, well, I guess we're going to hear Perlman play Brook. And Sydney says, very good, so let's go to the lecture. Now what we've done, we've used the reasoning so far to know that the value to Sydney upon saying Isaac thinking that Sydney rejects lecture would be 2 now. We've gotten this up to 2. This one was valued at 12/11s initially using security. this one, that says, oh, if I reject that, then this one has at least value 2 to Sydney, because that's the only option that allows him to have at least 1.1 amongst the Nash solutions. So this one now has 2, and Sydney says, yes, yes, very good. So let's go to the lecture. So now Isaac is looking at this and says, Sydney has rejecting lecture. He's not rejecting lecture. So of course, if he rejected lecture, he would have something worth at least 2. So he's not got something worth at least 2 here. There's only one option for him, and that the Nash doesn't have as high a value as the Nash has nothing of value to except the pure strategy ASAI going to here, Chomsky. So Isaac says, well, rejecting concert means that Sydney expects at least 2 by going to the lecture. So Isaac says, then said, I guess I'm going to hear Chomsky, because that's the only thing that yields at least 2 to Sydney in the left under a solution that's acceptable. And then Sydney replies in his proposed witticism. But at least you'll enjoy that more than you would the Bruch, because the value to Isaac and here Chomsky is a little bit higher than this to Kromer. So what's unusual about this? I've used both security reasoning and expectation maximization in order to get a recursive version of this forward induction by first saying, what signal do you get by learning that lecture has been rejected? And so when concert is rejected, lecture not rejected, that provides a new way of signaling the value of going this way. That is, I didn't accept that. Had I accepted that, I would have had a value of 2. So I reject that, so I have a value of at least 4. That requires both using security maximization and the admissibility. It fits in Isaac's theory. I know of no theory of forward induction that would support this kind of iterative recursive use of signals by saying, first, what would you do if this were my signal? But I won't send you that, what then is this signal? So I just simply say, that's a case where I know how to do it with IP and get the theory of forward induction up to a rather interesting iterative form. Because we don't have a clear value for what's on the left in that case, okay? And so we use IP to do that. And then that gives us a value for what's on the right. And then when that's rejected, we go back and apply the forward. So there's some questions.
Yeah, I was wondering how do you decide? So you started this saying that we didn't know what happens in this concert. So why start this way rather than moving the other way?
Yeah, so the one question is, what happens if we start reading the other way, we get a different answer.
Yeah.
Because the security value associated with rejecting this, well, so what I mean to say is we get a different resolution of, so you want to say, what happens if Sydney says we're going this way? The question is, how do we value this? If we value this only with its security value, then that's 2/3, and that's not enough to constrain what's going to happen here. So that leaves this game of indeterminate. The signal in rejecting that doesn't give you anything here. It's only by rejecting this first that you get a powerful signal out of rejecting this. Now, as I say, this is the sketch of a theory. I don't have the formalism worked out, but I do know that this is depending on both security and Bayes, both best response and security. And this, I don't know outside of IP where you can put both of them together in this kind of way. There are, of course, mixtures a little bit of security with IP, but that's a one round shot. I don't know. So this is an example of where I think there's opportunity to develop a theory of forward induction, which is in the need of development if you're sympathetic with the classical rejection to subgame perfection. I am. And yes.
I don't quite see why you need to use 12
in which one?
So
here?
Yeah, when you say says it would be problem then because it said it's an E admissible, which was 12 in the
yeah.
But couldn't you just say apparently he's not expecting 4, so he's expecting 1.5? So then
No, he might get 0. There's no guarantee you won't wind up with 0 if there's miscoordination. The lower end goes all the way down to 0. You're not short of a Nash solution. So that's why I use security values, because security values don't depend. Security values they're just that. They don't depend on what the other character is doing. So if you say, well, maybe he's satisfied with 1.5, that's only if you have a Nash, and we don't have reason to think they'll coordinate on a Nash yet, because we don't have, they may be miscoordinated. And so I may have a lower expectation of 0 at this point of what the other one's going to do. Yes.
So can I think about this proposals of refinement? There are different refinements of definition myself.
But yes, so except the notion of refinement here is appealing to all kinds of things that are very distant from best response. So given at the end of the day, we're settling on a Nash equilibrium, in some sense, this all could be folded under the very broad umbrella of Nash equilibrium. But I'm saying that we're folding it under the umbrella, in which all the extra work is being done by non-Nash stuff. Okay, I won't say I'm anti-Nash. I'm simply saying it's not good enough even to be subgame perfect. You want to take into account signals. And the question is, what kind of signal makes sense of this kind of sophisticated reasoning about, well, this is the value you would get. I mean, do you see how I'm doing it? And anyway, this is just a sketch. I'm not offering a theory, I'm offering you a challenge. Okay. So the first thing is you have to be sympathetic with the idea of forward induction, which is what the classical objection that I started with, that was the one that 1.5 on the left. If that doesn't bother you, then this obviously is not worth your attention. But if you're sympathetic with the idea of forward induction as requiring a further refinement of subgame perfect is not taking account of forward intervention, then this is a way, I think, of showing what you could do with IP forward induction that I don't know how to do. Okay, enough on that. There were 2 other things I wanted to do. The next one is, I think, more interesting. Okay, so I'd like to, we haven't done a class exercise in a while. How long? We haven't done a class exercise. This is technically a trivia question. Please don't use screens to answer it. And what I'd like you to do is look at these 25 trivia assertions. Oops. Do you have access to the slides? Or I don't know how to put up 2 screens at once at this point. Author, is there any way of putting up 2 screens at once? Or can people look at this for a while and then tell me when I'll switch to the other one?
Also on the website.
Oh, they're on the website, yeah, if you have access to the website. So what I'd like you to do, look, you put yourself back into these. And what you're asked to do is assign probabilities in increments of 120, 0.05 to these. Don't worry about it. What we want to do is talk about scoring or evaluating probabilities of short maximum. And so don't spend too much time. You put down probability numbers. These are statements that are true or false. I'm pretty sure I've got the correct truth values for them when I assess them. That is, I've actually done the homework. And I'll flip back to the first one, all right, for those who don't. First one is first 7. So let me flip for a few minutes. So that was the first 7. So this is about some geography, rivers being longer, oceans being deep. Now I'll flip back to the other one. You can answer a few of them, not all of them. This is my anti-Phil David. So. Here, Phil David's models. Calibration. This one is perverse in the way that you expect it to be perverse. That may tell you that's a signal, but I hope you don't take it into account. It will ruin the point of the example. Enough of this torture, or do you want to continue? Are you so driven by exams you have to get answers everything? Yes, it means we're done, or you want authors addicted to it. He's a true student that way. Sees an exam and try to answer it. As far as I can tell, these questions about snowfall and so on are still the way they were a few years ago. So local warming hasn't changed for things these days. Well, I don't like torture. We move on, author enough? Okay. So the question is, how are we assessing these probabilistic forecasts or probabilistic forecasting in general? So there's this notion of calibration. It has multiple meanings, but the meaning that you often find cognitive psychologists using a risk analysis means the following. We look at a particular probabilistic forecaster, and we group together those forecasts by the value of the probabilistic forecast. So look at all the forecasts said at the value of, say, 0.5. Look at all the forecasts made said at the value of 0.6. And then you do the completely intuitive thing, you compare probabilities with frequencies. So if I've got a forecaster who's made a bunch of forecasts at 0.5, I want to say how often do those forecasts occur? And are they near 0.5 or are they going to be away from 0.5? If they're near 0.5, it sums up, calibrated. And if it's away from 0.5, you get one of two criticisms. You're either underconfident if the frequency is higher than 0.5, or overconfident if the frequency is less than 0.5. So basically, you can, for a given forecaster, check calibration at different forecast levels. And you can be calibrated at some values, undercalibrated, underconfident at others, overconfident at still others. Again, what you're doing is you're taking the forecasts and you're grouping the forecasts by the forecaster's magnitude of forecasts. So if this forecast and this forecast get put together, it depends on whether they were assigned the same forecast probability. And then once you group them by the same forecast, you have probability numbers. All these events are being assigned the same probability within this forecast group. And you say, does it match up with the frequency? And that's calibration. You're comparing probabilities with frequencies, something everyone wants to do in statistics. How do you compare probabilities with frequencies? And in this case, if the frequencies match the probabilities, that gets a thumb up, says you're calibrated. And if the frequencies don't match the probabilities, you're suffering from two types of cognitive deficiencies, you're either overconfident or weak. And there's lots of psychological literature about how people are systematically overconfident. Certain kinds of forecasts are underconfident. Other kinds of forecasts, how experts are typically overconfident with extreme forecasts, high and underconfident. Low forecasts. The literature is enormous, yes.
I can understand why you group together the forecasts at the same.
Because you're trying to see how it, think of it like the forecaster is being a meter. And you say, is this meter well designed when it says 0.5? And the idea is it would be well designed if 0.5 means about half the time right and half the time wrong. So you're comparing personal forecast probabilities with frequency of occurrence. And so you're thinking of the meter as giving you not just a personal probability, but an indication of how often something will happen. But you're using the forecaster to prove it. And then the judgment is how good is the forecaster. So now I'm going to skip the next one. I was going to, out of sake of time, I was going to give you the value for some of these and see how that changes your opinion in others and see whether Bayes updating improves your calibration or not. Let's just skip this. Let me tell you something about these. I'm going to give you the answer to all 25 of these, but I'm going to tell you something. Your real calibration score, the one we'll make public and broadcast at your home university, will be based not on these 25, but will be based on 40 questions, of which 15 I'm about to give you. But first, I'm going to tell you how these 25 came out so you can see how you're doing. Every statement is true. Every one of the 25 statements is true, according to my best sources, which means that if you didn't have probability 1, you are underconfident. Because you're giving frequencies and whatever probability, however I group them, this is why it's perverse. However I group them, I know that it's a sequence of all ones, however you group them, and so the only way to calibrate the sequence is putting all the probabilities very high. So if you've got some 0.5s in there, you're as badly underconfident as you could be, because every time you said 0.5, it occurs. Of course, whenever you say 0.4, but it's all right. Don't worry, there's a chance. You have a chance for salvation because your calibration score will not be determined until you've answered all 40 questions. Those 25 you can't change anymore, but you've got freedom for how you want to use your next 15. So let me give you 15 questions. George Washington's famous white horse was dark brown in color. George Bush has his picture on the US $1 bill. Las Vegas is the capital of the US. Hollywood is the capital of the US. The Pittsburgh Pirates, my hometown team, who lost more games than they won each year between 1993 and 2012, which is a record for consecutive losses, had the best one-loss record in Major League over those 20 years. It will snow at least 1 meter in Bristol today, and so on and so forth. I'll end the last one with some politics. Senator Ted Cruz is the most popular living American, especially amongst registered Democrats. So you can assign probabilities to each one of these, and I've presented them in such a way that I suspect you have little doubt as to the falsity. What's forecast values? Think about it. Because I'm going to calibrate you based on your answer for questions, not if anyone in doubt, these are all false. So let's go through. Let's see, we're using through. How many of you use 0.5 for a question answer? Okay, about how many did you use?
The first 25 questions?
Yeah, first 25.
About 10 or so.
10 or so. Okay. So right now and that's going to be the modal number. I mean, you probably didn't use any other values. Yeah. So right now on the forecast that you've got a lot of forecasts on, you're doing as absolutely worse as you can be in terms of calibration. You could be even worse by having all that people go wrong. But right now, every time. But you're not being graded on this, you're being graded on 50. What are you going to do with these 15 questions? You can take 10 and do something.
Put at least for 10 of those also 0.5.
Yeah, 10. So all of a sudden, it's about 20 questions. What's its frequency? 10. Perfect. Perfect calibration. This is what's called strategic forecasting. Why should I be straightforward in my forecast if I'm going to be scored by calibration? If I get some feedback, calibration incentivizes strategic forecasting. If my salary rests, or if your grades rest on me, are you going to tell the truth about your opinion? Are you going to get a calibration score? You're going to play the test. And calibration, as a scoring rule, does not incentivize honest forecasting. It's straightforward forecasting. It involves strategic planning. No matter what value you use, the most modal value you use, you want to take advantage of the falses of these to bring down your miscalibration as close as you can. So, for example, you were able to correct all the errors and got a perfect value. You still have 5 questions left to play with. You can do that.
That is, if you give a 0.5 frequency to the time.
Yes, that's right. You announce 0.5. Take 10 of these questions and assign them 0.5. They get grouped with the other 10 questions. And the frequency of correct is 50%. That's one. There are other strategies for strategic forecasting under calibration. This is the one I would adopt if I were a weather forecaster. So the weather forecasters are making daily forecasts. Chance of rain today, blah, blah. Of course, the forecast they give tomorrow comes after they know what happened today, so they can run calibration. So they're getting this feedback every day. So suppose my salary were based on my calibration for the end of the year. And there are some stations in Pittsburgh that claim they have the most accurate, which means well-calibrated forecast. They're paying the forecast, I think they would set up the forecast. So what do I do? Here I am. It's November, and I see that on days when I've set 0.3, it's only rain 22% of the time. And I'm looking at the weather map, and to the west, of course, east, west to east. There to the west of Pittsburgh is Columbus, Ohio, about 12 hours out of rain, and they're reporting record downpours. So my forecast for tomorrow is going to be what? Let's remember 30% or 22%. Well, I better try and get that better. So tomorrow, instead of saying your umbrella is the record downpours, I say 30%. What's my salary going to do? Probably fine. That's good. But there's another strategy, which is the one I would use. In Pittsburgh, and here the records go back a long ways. Annual precipitation rate has been about 39.5% year over year over year. It's a pretty wet place, but its variability is new. There's very little variability. It's creeping up now because of climate change, but it's still say 40%. So what I could do, if all I was going to be scored on with calibration, would be a very easy job. I get up in the morning and I look at the maps and I say 40%. And tomorrow I look at the maps and I say 40%. I think 14 spring. See the thunderstorm coming in from Columbus, Ohio. 40%. See the clear sky coming in from Columbus, Ohio. 40%. And my calibration for the year is almost surely to be within very small fraction because the stable frequencies in that large group. So that's another strategy. By taking a large population with a very stable frequency of what's going on in those things, a large population, where we're divided into smaller groups, it's smaller subpopulation. And those are the classic siblings, smaller number of rates and frequency. So another strategy is the one that Rutherford professor, which is I hang up the sign and say forecast more 40% of if all you want is calibration, I'm going to get a great story, have a wonderful time. Vacation. You see what's going on? This problem. We don't want just calibration. That's not right. In fact, it incentivizes strategic forecasting. And the question is, what can you learn from my forecast if I'm saying 40% every year? You know, it's well calibrated, but it has no content. That distinguishes one day from another. Okay, so the statistical way of putting this is to say we want to introduce some sort of loss function or penalty associated with forecasting. Thomas will get into some of this. We want to introduce some scoring rules to see how to evaluate problems in forecasting. Calibration, you see already, has at least one drawback, and that if the only thing involved is calibration, then you're going to incentivize some new strategic forecast. So here, I'll go through three with you. One kind of forecast is so you have an event. It's either the indicator function is from event 1 or 0, like a false question in your elementary school. And the teacher just marks it, either you get it right or you get it wrong. Either you announce the value of the indicator function or you mark wrong. You can announce any number you want, but either you say true or false, probably 0. And if it's 1 and it's 1, you get the loss. If it's if you announce anything other than what occurs in losses, 1 otherwise it's 0. So you're going to announce either 0 or 1. What do you do to maximize your expected value, minimize your expected penalty? You'll announce the more probable events that's having probability. That's what you're saying, right? And that's what a teacher learns in the true false test mark that way. Is you only learn whether the student thought it was more probable than it was. That's only whether it was 0.95 or 0.6. You can't serve. All of that is math. So that's not giving you much information. You could get more sophisticated mean deviation loss. This would be where you have a random variable x and you allow a forecast. And it's the difference between the two in absolute value, how close you get to the real value. Which is, now you can say, what part of my personal distribution am I going to announce? What aspect of my personal distribution am I going to announce? median, with mean deviation. If it was 0 or 1, in general, I'm going to give you the low because nearness doesn't count. If it's 0 or 1, either I get it right or all losses are the same. There's no gain for being close. As they say in Texas, close on the counts, portions and endings. But that's 0 or 1 loss. So you announce the most probable because that's the only chance of not suffering the loss of 1 in 0. That maximizes your probability of not getting the loss. That's the mode of the distribution. Binary cases as well. For mean deviation, this is all out of statistics, the aspect of the distribution which will minimize your expected loss, maximize your expected utility. Everyone understands what the square rule is? X is a random variable, it takes a value, f of x is your forecast. You look at the difference between those two, make the absolute deviation. How close did you come? That's your penalty. Best you can do is 0. You announce the median. The point at which it's just like definitely 7. And that maximizes your expected utility score. But in the case of binary events, the median is the same as the mean. And so I'll get back to 0. Because either it's a 0 or a 1 that carries the first point that has more probability than a half. And so I would say 0 or 1 or never. So median is not going to do any better than 0 or 1 loss, and it's for events. Now we come, so those don't work. We're working our way up in sort of polynomial complexity. Something that was discovered by G.W. Breyer in 1950, it's actually based on old analysis. Go back as far as Gauss. If I replace the mean deviation with squared error, and those of you that statistics from square error all the time, you may remember what aspect of your distribution minimizes the expected square error. It's the mean of the distribution. The mean of the distribution. And when we're dealing with indicator functions, what's the mean of the distribution? It's the probability. We wrote the little proof value. It's P of E times 1 minus P of E times 0, which is P of E. That's the mean of my distribution. So my squared error loss, I minimize my expected loss, maximize my expected utility by announcing a precise probability of stopping these. Diffinetti was aware of that and used this feature that squared error loss then is called a proper, in fact, strictly proper scoring rule in the sense that the only aspect of my distribution that minimizes, the only thing I can report that minimizes my expected loss, maximizes my expected utility, is the mean of my distribution. No other feature will do as well. And if means are what you're trying to elicit, then it's a strictly proper scoring rule. You incentivize the forecaster to report exactly what you want to do. Distribution, as I reminded us yesterday, the mean of an indicator function is just the probability. So I know my probability of the event of the brain, score me with squared error. That's what we calculate. And do sums for separate forecasts. You maximize the expected score of the sum. Maximize the expected utility of the sum by maximizing the expected utility. So with this in mind, Diffinetti actually, starting about 1960, shifted away from his provision game. It became less prominent in his writings. And if you look at the later writings, he emphasizes more and more a different game. It's a forecaster. Why is he interested in the forecaster game? Well, he's worried about strategic aspects of his pricing game. Let me give you one of those. 21. Good. So I want to show you, and Diffinetti was aware of this kind of problem. The pricing game, like the calibration game, allows strategic play on the part of the bookie. The bookie, even with a two-sided price, the bookie may not announce the bookie's anticipated expected value. The bookie will have to announce expectations, otherwise the subject is sure loss. But the theorem doesn't say those expectations have to be for your policy, have to be for some policy. And the forecaster, the bookie, the one setting the prices, may have incentive to switch to a different probability depending on what the bookie thinks about the gambler. Let me give you an extreme example. This is one of my favorite. If you've heard me on this, I always use the same thing. So I'm the bookie, and what I'm asked to price is the parody, odd or even, of Michela's mother's birthday on the, that is an odd day of the month or even day. And guess who's going to be the gambler? So I have to bet with him about his mother's birthday being odd or even. I take it he knows that. It's certain that. Given his background as Italian, he knows that as well as he does it. Now, I've not discussed this with him, so I don't know. Now, if I think about it, my honest opinion, I really have nothing better than the random birth model. And since there are 51% days that are odd and 49% days that are even, 31. I would say 51% would be my honest price, but I will not say 51%. Why not? It's Michela plays second. And he gets to see which side of the bet he puts me on, and he knows the truth. He can make me bet against even, 51, against odd 51%, or on odd. Against odd, I put up 49%. Or he can make me bet on even at 49%, or maybe bet on odd at 51%. He knows which is the winning gamble. So he can put me on the losing side of the gamble for sure. So we have here something very interesting. If I say 51%, I'm not a sure loser, but I am sure to lose all my money that he can put up against me, because he knows. Why am I not a sure loser? Because if his mother's birthday had been the other state, I would not lose the bet. That's what coherence is about. But right now, that's not what's on my mind. On my mind is not coherence. What's on my mind is how much will I lose, because he knows the answer to it. If I say anything other than 0 or 1, I will surely lose all my money, because he will raise the stakes and keep me on the wrong side of the bet. Does everyone see? Because he knows the truth, and he controls which side of the bet and how many units. So he can raise the stake as high as he wants, in which I'm putting up. I have to cover all of my side of the bet and the losing side of the bet. And I know he can put me on the losing side of the bet. So what do? I don't announce probability of 0.5, whatever like that. There's only one strategy, and has some chance of not losing my money. I go and put all my probability. I announce probability 1 if I think it's at least a half, or 0 if I think it's less than a half. Because now I at least have positive probability of not losing anything. I won't win anything. But if he puts me on the losing side of the bet, and I put up 0 to cover the losing side of the bet, so what if I lose? I don't lose anything. If my probability of the event is 0, and the event doesn't occur, and I don't lose anything. If he puts me on the winning side of the bet, I don't get anything. I don't happen. I don't lose anything. So the only chance I have of not losing all of it is using extreme probability. It's coherent. It's not my honest opinion, but it's the only strategy. So it's like the 0-1 loss, or false loss, because he knows that. Difficulty was aware of these features. He got more and more anxious about them. And then it found salvation in the Breyer score. Right? The Breyer score takes Michela out of the game. I'm just being forecast. There's no putting me on one side of the other. I'm just announcing a probability. And I'm being scored by it. And I have every incentive to report my honest opinion. There's no strategic betting allowed. I mean, no strategic betting that it is reasonable. Because anything I say that isn't my mean of my distribution has a lower expected score utility than if I'm straightforward. So that takes this problem away. There's no opponent in the game. It's a one-player game. And since it's a one-player game, it's only I'm playing against myself, and there's a unique solution given that I have a distribution for forecasting. Infinity proves something quite interesting. So let me skip betting against an expert. This is, we're using squared error. And so Diffinetti introduces the following variant of coherence, which is to say, what does it mean to say your forecasts are coherent in the scoring rule game? Well, you've given forecast for some collection K of random variables. This replaces the prices. We do the squared error. And we say your forecasts are incoherent. If there was another forecast, that would surely have given you a uniformly better score. So we're using dominance again, uniform dominance, but it's not against what an opponent might strategize, it's against what other forecasts you might have made. Is there another forecast you might have made which surely would have given you a better score? And Diffinetti proves that, and this is Diffinetti's contribution, we already knew that a set of prices in the pricing game are coherent if and only if they agree with the expectations under some finitely additive probability. We went through that this morning. And Diffinetti proves that the only way a set of forecasts are coherent in the respective dominance against rival forecasts is if they too are the expected value of the random variables. And if you're playing both games, the two have to agree, otherwise you get into trouble. That's a separate matter. But if we were just playing the forecast game and not the provision game, coherence in forecast means there's no rivals. It's not that there's any opponent. There's just no rival forecast you could have given to the same quantities, which would have yielded a surely better score. Found their way better. So this suggests maybe we can avoid the strategic aspect of pricing in the IP theory. And this is another area that's open. I think the results are pretty negative in the sense that I had a hand in this, and the things I've come up with are mostly showing that certain things are good. But you might say, we know how to take the two-sided prices and make them into one-sided prices and develop a theory of IP. Can we take advantage of the existence of these scoring rules, or many scoring rules that are like squared error that incentivize reporting the mean of the distribution? Can I find, I don't have a mean of a distribution when I'm IP, I've got a set of elements. Is there any kind of scoring rule that will incentivize me to report my honest set of elements, like from P lower bar to P upper bar? I don't know if that's real. I can prove some lexicographic, not static. So all the triggers. Some people cases with that. We've worked on that. I believe that every continuous proper score, every continuous real value score for inputs of probabilities and across the problem. That's really, I think I have the box all. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to, but I'm saying that basic ideas will not work. So this is a second opportunity, which is what do you do to try and take advantage of the idea that there are incentive-compatible procedures for precise probabilities, procedures for encouraging you to be straightforward to the report. Is there any, in addition to being coherent, is there any way of putting that into the forecast lane? What kind of scoring rules can be used to try and encourage straightforward IP forecasting? Now, just to give you a sense how subtle it is, I can give you a variant of Breyer's score, which if it focuses on the lower end, as if all I want to do is your lower probability to get down your upper. I can give you a rule which, by gamma maximing or Isaac Levi's admissibility and security, will be strictly proper. I know how to score you if all I want is the lower end. I know how to score you if all I want is the upper end. But if I try and put the two together, they don't work together. You can't, I can do just the lower, I can do just the upper. If I try and do both, there's no proper scoring. Real value scoring. So this is an area that's open. Does everyone understand why it's important? Because we would like to be able to assess IP forecasts. We don't want to use calibration subject to the same problems. What do we do? What's the counterpart of probability? And I know a bunch of stuff. But that doesn't mean there isn't a good idea out there that hasn't been. And maybe we'll hear some of it. So this is one where I don't know is the best I can tell you. I can know a lot of things that don't work. Okay. How much time?
14 months.
Okay. Down to the last one. You notice I'm giving you less and less detail about what can be done. This is going to be harder and harder problems. At least in my eyes. So we were talking about variations in dominance, and I spent the day with you talking about differentiating and uniform dominance. This is where the dominance is bounded away. We also had concerns about act-state dependence, because act-state dependence threatens the application of dominance within the well. I would like to make a side note here that differentiating in his first game, provision game, not in the scoring mode game, but in the provision game, differentiating has a result which could be generalized even to include act-state dependence, in the sense that, I think I mentioned this to you, even if there's collusion between nature and the incoherent bookie, the bookie cannot be saved from true loss. And there's a general reason why, when dominance is of a certain kind, then the dominance is even immune to overturn by sure loss. Suppose we've got two rows here, and suppose that O1, the O1 row, the one that's dominated by the O2, is such that, if you allow me to talk about the supremum of the O1 values is less than the infimum of the O2 values. That means the worst you can get under Act 2 is better than the best you can get under Act 1, using best and loosely if this is an infinite state space, as these may be. And maybe no best, and maybe just be super, or no worse. But if Act 2, if the infimum of Act 2 is better than the supremum of Act 1, not only do you have dominance, but you have a kind of robust dominance that's immune to being overturned by act-state dependence. Because no matter what the probability is of the states under Act 2, no matter what the probability of the states under Act 1, the expectation is higher under Act 2 than Act 1. And that's what differentiating is in the first game, because when you're incoherent, Act 1 might be your sure loss under some strategy. Act 2 is abstaining to 0. The infimum of 0 is 0. The supremum of the uniform bounded away sure loss is something less than 0. So let me say that again. If Act 1 is your incoherent forecast and the gambler has put you in sure loss, that's bounded away from 0 sure loss. So the best you can get is no better than minus epsilon. It's bounded away from 0. But abstaining is 0, so it's only with robust dominance. So even when the gambler, when the bookie is allowed to collude with nature, if the bookie is offered incoherent odds, that cannot be overturned by having a friend in nature trying to help you out. You still suffer for loss. So it's quite interesting, since I do layers here, differentiating is bounded away sure loss in the case of the pricing game, because Act 1 is a constant, Act 2 is a constant 0, satisfies this special kind of dominance. I'll give it a robust dominance. I don't know if it has, I don't know how much it was discussed. And in that case, act-state dependence is of no matter. So that applies in the pricing game. In the forecasting game, there is no such dominance. Dominance is bounded away, but there's no constant. It's not like you just, all you're showing is that if you're incoherent, there's some other forecast that's always doing better, but that better doesn't produce this kind of result, that the worst you can get under it is better than the best you can get under it. And if you're doing forecasting with collusion in nature, you can have a case if nature colludes with you, where announcing incoherent forecasts are better than announcing incoherent. So differentiating second game, although it satisfies incentive compatibility, the forecasting game, it does not bring us back to robust dominance. So the forecasting game is the second game. So if there's collusion between the forecast and the forecast, even though Breyer's score is a proper score, it might be better to give the forecast. We can move on. Okay, well, what do you do about other kinds of dominance? So I gave you about uniform dominance, whether dominance principles are there, weak dominance. Here's an example of desirability or pricing, which is not going to work under a uniform dominance or even simple dominance. So a two-sided coin is flipped, it lands either heads or tails. Decision maker strictly prefers the wager, the random variable, the gamble indicator function for heads over the indicator function for tails. So 1, 0, yesterday's notation, strictly preferred to 0, 1. However, for each real number, no matter how much, for each real number greater than 1, so I've said, so you can look at the gambles of the form 1, 0, 0, C. And so what we're saying is if C is less than or equal to 1, then 1, 0 is preferred to 0, C. But if C is greater than 1, then 0C is preferred to 1, 0. Technically, this is a violation of the Archimedean condition, because what you're saying is 1, 0, 1 is strictly dispreferred to 1, 0, is strictly dispreferred to 0, C for any C bigger than 1. And the reason that this is a violation of the Archimedean condition, if you want to see it, there are several versions of the Archimedean condition. There's got to be there's a version that says, if this occurs, the new one must be indifferent to some mixture of the two extremes. But the mixture of the two extremes will be a mixture of 1 and something bigger than 1, which will still be bigger than 1. And so you can't find a mixture that sits in between these two. Sorry, sits in between these. Every mixture of 0, 1 and 0, C bigger than 1 will be a 0, D, where D is bigger than 1. It's bigger than 1. So there's no mixture of these two that squeezes in there. No fair price for the indicator function for heads. Well, maybe the problem is that our theory of prices is too restrictive. Why should we stop with real value prices? Maybe we want to use some other mathematical structure. The one that comes to mind is to say, well, in this case, the heads indicator is infinitesimally more probable than the tails indicator, but infinitesimal and any real price is going to jump that too much. That's why when you put any probability C on tails, it's already too valuable. Well, what does the theory of IP look like? There's some theory looked at for precise probabilities with infinitesimals. What about the IP version of this? I know there's lots of work in progress. I think now I'm part of that, but I think it's under construction. Lots of room for people. If you're interested in this kind of dominance, lots of people to be working. Respecting weak dominance, the particular kind of case that comes to mind is, suppose I've got, I'll give you the simplest of the infinite cases to show you the problem. I've got an innumerable infinity of possibilities indexed by the integer. And in the different style, I'd like to say each one of these is equally probable. That is, I want to say qualitatively, I judge state 1 is equally probable to state 2 is equally probable to state 3 for all the. Well, there is in different theory a whole class of probabilities that do that. They are finitely not countably average probabilities that say 0 for every signal. That works. But the problem is once you said 0 for every signal, then you are indifferent between the indicator function for a state and the constant 0. Because the indicator function for the state gets probability of 0 times 1 plus probability of 1 times 0. So that's 0, and the 0 gets 0, so they're both indifferent. So you're not respecting the dominance, which is 1 over 0 and plus 1. I should write this down. How much time? Minus what?
4 minutes.
Minus 4 or
no, plus 4.
Okay, plus 4 if I can do it. So here you are, the indicator for state 1. All the other states are the same. And you said any indicator is equally probable with any other indicator. And there is in Diffinetti's theorem a coherent probability for this. It's a probability that assigns 0 to each of the states. It's a finite, not countably additive one. What's the problem? It's coherent, but it doesn't respect weak dominance. Because weak dominance says this act weakly dominates this act, but the expected utility of this act is 0. The expected utility of this act is 0, so you'd be indifferent between them. You need to say the probability of state 1 is arbitrarily close to 0, but less than any real number, because I want to have them all equal. An infinitesimal could do that. There's some theory worked out that way. I don't think we're close yet to resolving the question of what to do with infinite state spaces in IP theory. Lots of it. I've been looking at infinitesimals to accept that these technically external sets of infinitesimals. Not the internal sets. So that's the third and final opportunity. I've been training for the presentation with the problem. So I'll stop there and say, see, there's lots you can do. There's a story about one of the teachers at mine when I was an undergraduate who used to throw me in with ordinary homework with basically open problems to see that anyone could solve them, because if you set an expectation, it's a homework problem, you should be able to solve it, and someone could solve it. So if I were that sort of messy professor, I would just these problems. But I'll tell you just what about them. Send me an email when we make progress. I'd be most curious to see how to solve this problem. And with that, I'll look this over to you.